Welcome to the Mac for the Blind Spring 2022 online courses. This is number 4. This is all about troubleshooting apps and troubleshooting macOS. I have gotten and I witness a lot of questions on various tech support email lists that I'm on in regards to all kinds of questions about apps and macOS and when do you have to reinstall macOS? When is it a problem? When is an app a problem? When is it just user error, et cetera, et cetera? So I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer all those lingering questions out there because sometimes there's a lot of troubleshooting involved, but hopefully with this lesson, I can at least point people in the right directions or give you some helpful advice that will be useful to you should you encounter any kind of situation. So let's start first with the overall operating system itself. macOS 12.4, I believe, is what we are up to. Monterey. Apple just announced the next one is going to be called Ventura, which I assume is going to be out in the fall. But first question that a lot of people have asked me is they're running Catalina, they're running Big Sur, they're running an earlier operating system. Should I update to Monterey? And if I do, are there any significant issues I should know about? Now, let me take a step back and just say this. I've been beta testing and working with macOS since 2005, since OS 10.4 Tiger. I've witnessed, experienced, seen a lot happen over the years. I've seen the ebb and flow of blind users who hit the panic button here and there. You have your usual group of suspects who love to abuse and criticize Apple every time there's a new release and what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, et cetera, et cetera. So my point being that in some 17 years, things change, but they remain the same. So here is my advice. There are some good sources out there, and I can tell you there are some sources out there that will be very trusted in terms of looking at what bugs may exist, which bugs have been fixed. AppleViz, at least their bug list is something that people should be aware of. If you really want to get an idea at any point in time what kinds of bugs exist and which ones have been fixed and which they consider to be serious, quote unquote. Now, here's the thing. We're well into Monterey. In my opinion, anybody who's on the fence for upgrading their Mac, updating their Mac should do it. There's no reason at this point. Are there bugs? Absolutely. There's always going to be bugs. And this is just the nature of the beast. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about macOS and voiceover or Windows and JAWS, et cetera. The code is so vast and there's just no way that every single bug is going to be fixed, and certain bugs and certain issues take priority over others, even if we might personally feel differently. One of the things you do often see, unfortunately, on some of the tech supports lists is you get users who have a specific issue that affects them, and they are more than willing to make it seem like it is a showstopper for the rest of the world. So you always have to take, those types of things with a grain of salt, in my opinion. You want to look at the big picture for updating. Now, let's just make sure we understand terminology here. Updating means that you have let's say you upgraded to Monterey 12.1, and we are now on 12.4. At least I believe the public beta, the public availability is 12.4. Cliff, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But that's updating. Updating is going from an incremental update. As far as upgrading, Upgrading is when you actually are jumping macOS versions. So if you are coming from Catalina or Big Sur and you are going to Monterey, that is considered upgrading. Upgrading in all, for all intents and purposes compared to Windows is a lot safer. 99.9% of the time, it goes smoothly. You don't have to, your data is not erased, regardless of whether you update or upgrade.
Data is on 12.5.
Okay, so 12.4 is the current version then. The thing you should always do, regardless of whether you update or upgrade, is back up your data. I am sometimes amazed and shocked having, as I work with clients over the years, that there are still a substantial number of people who do not back up their systems. I can't speak with a lot of authority on Windows. I don't have a lot of interaction with Windows users, but I guarantee you that it's going to be the same sort of discovery. It's just something that you should do. Don't assume. It's not a magic box. Your hard drive is not indestructible. Your hard drive has a capacity to it. So you should get into the habit of using some kind of backup system, whether you use Time Machine, which is built into your Mac, or you decide to do a manual backup, or you do an off-site backup, maybe P-Cloud or something like that. The rumor has it, there was talk or rumor that Apple was actually going to have an iCloud Time Machine backup availability. And there were even rumors that Apple was going to get back into the business of doing routers, the Extreme, the Apple Time Capsule and all those products. I don't know if that came up in the thing. I didn't see any mention of it from what I read, but I've read that rumor in a couple of very, I guess you call it credible sources. So as far as Mac OS and whether you decide to update or upgrade, everything is accessible to you as a blind user. You don't have to worry about that being the case. When you do an upgrade, all you need to do is, if you're running, Catalina or Big Sur or whatever the case may be, as long as your computer, your system meets all the minimum requirements for Monterey, and you have enough available disk space, and your system itself actually is capable of updating or upgrading, you should be perfectly fine. You let the installer will download. You can go into system preferences under software updates. It will prompt you. You could go into the App Store as well, but the easiest way, just to be sure, is system preferences under software updates. If you're in the App Store, you're not sure if your computer is able to handle the Monterey. It's not showing up in, let's just say hypothetically, it's not showing up in software update. You could always search the App Store for Monterey and see if it allows you to download and install it. You may have a computer from 2015, 2016. I don't remember off the top of my head what the baseline is, but I know it changed from Big Sur. So you may have a system within the last 5 or 6 years that's still not upgradable to Monterey. So, you got to be aware of that stuff as well. But typically Apple tries to not make systems go into obsolescence if they can avoid it. So I think I'm going to have to look. I've got the Monterey guide. I know Cliff has looked into it. I just have not had a chance to really sit down and read the nuts and bolts of it. But as I said, worst comes to worst, search the App Store and see if it's available. If it doesn't come up in your system preferences under software updates. Now, when you prompt an update or an upgrade, the software is going to be downloaded in background. When the system is ready to restart, you will get a notification that warns you and allows you to defer it if you're in a situation where you're not able to allow the system to restart. Maybe you're doing work. Maybe you're just listening to a movie or music and you don't feel like having to, go through that process. You can defer it to later. There's going to be different options that will pop up, such as remind me in an hour, remind me in a day, do the upgrade overnight. So you just got to check that dialogue out that comes up and make your choice accordingly. But if you're there and you're ready to go, you let the system restart. It's initially going to, do some installation first, and then it's going to reboot. And that's where the actual main installation happens. And you can turn on voiceover if you feel like wanting to check on the progress. Obviously, Command F5 if you have a keyboard that you're able to do that. If you have the Macs that have, you need to hold down the Command key and press the power button 3 times. You'll be able to actually see what the progress is. Now, it's going to take a little bit. So if you've not experienced it before, don't panic, don't get concerned. Sometimes it's going to take 10, 15 minutes before your system will then start up again. And then if you had voiceover on, obviously, once you get to the setup assistant, voiceover will come on again. And there's still going to be some more time spent in the setup assistant. So again, don't panic if you see the progress indicator. Because there's still stuff that goes on in background. If you're doing an update over an upgrade, updates are usually a bit faster. But if you're doing an upgrade from an earlier version of macOS, that could take a little bit longer. So just let it do its thing. You may have to answer some questions. There may be some setup screens. So read the screens carefully. I try to emphasize this to clients, that you got to be very careful. Sometimes people just go to the next button, the next button, the next button. You don't know sometimes what you're skipping through. And this is how people end up turning on File Vault. They end up turning on things that they might not want, like desktop and documents in the cloud and using iCloud Drive. They may not be ready for that. So that's why you got to read the screens. Now, if you're doing an update, usually the only screen that comes up is something about, just agreeing to share analytic data with Apple from either, Apple itself or third-party developers. And you may have to sign in again to verify your Apple ID. Where you might get more extensive screens, or you will get more extensive screens, is if you're doing an actual upgrade from an earlier version of macOS. Then that's where you really have to be particularly careful about reading the screens to make sure you know what's checked. Let me put it to you that way. What checkbox is checked before you go to that next button, and just, keep going. In other words, just don't assume. Now, typically, obviously, from those of you who have been longtime Mac users, you know that, you don't normally have problems with Mac OS compared to what people sometimes see in Windows. But it's not to say by any stretch that Mac OS is perfect. You are going to have issues once in a while. Weird things are going to happen. One of the first things you should always try, if something strange is occurring with the system, something doesn't feel right. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I think a lot of you guys who are voiceover users, whether it's the Mac or voiceover, when you've been doing, or iOS, if you've been doing it long enough, just sometimes things just don't feel right when you're using voiceover. Things that you normally expect, behaviors you normally expect, are slowed down. Maybe things get stuck. Maybe things take a while, more time than they should. You just know in your gut that something is odd. 9 times out of 10, just reboot your system, reboot the Mac, shut it down completely, in fact, and then restart it again. That will usually fix a lot of those odd problems, particularly if you're the type of person that doesn't normally restart their computer. I know a lot of people in this day and age just close the lid on their laptop and they go away and they do what they got to do. When they want to use the Mac again, they flip the lid open and they start, they go back to doing what they have to do. But the thing is, sometimes you do need to just actually shut down the system, or at least at the very least, reboot it. Now, obviously keep in mind that if you're using File Vault, that you are going to have to unlock the system. Now, for people who are using M1 Macs, things are a little bit different. It is kind of a unified login window. It's different than the traditional FileVault login screen that you would see on Intel Macs, but you still have to unlock the system. Now, things are really, really strange. You're really having issues with your Mac. One of the things you can do is run a first aid. Now, first aid, you really should do from the recovery partition. In other words, with the Mac running, going into disk utility, finding first aid on the toolbar and running it is not really going to help with the Mac running, because you need to have the system disk not mounted for a first aid to work effectively. So what you're going to have to do, unfortunately, is go into your recovery partition, either holding down Command R during startup if you're using an Intel Mac. If you're using an M1 Mac, you're going to have to shut the computer down, then restart it and keep the power button down for a few extra seconds, and then follow the prompts to get into recovery. You may have to put in your system password, et cetera, et cetera. But once you're in recovery, you choose disk utility from the main window. In other words, you'll see the table. It'll have like reinstall macOS, help, Safari help, restore from a time machine backup. At the bottom of that table, you're going to find disk utility. You're going to select that, go to the next button, and then give it a few seconds. Disk utility is going to start up as it normally would if you were doing it within macOS itself. Once you get disk utility going, you interact with the table that has all of your disks. I would let you hear this, but I don't have a system ready that I can actually let you hear. But I do have an audio tutorial on the website that goes into doing this stuff. So if it's really a valuable tool for you, you can always purchase that. Remember to use the coupon for the 20% discount. But once you are in disk utility, select your your Macintosh HD volume. You want to get the disk itself, not the volume. I'm sorry. You want the disk itself, the topmost item, Macintosh HD. Below Macintosh HD, you're gonna hit the volume itself, the macOS 10. I keep saying macOS 10. The Macintosh HD. So the top is going to say something about Apple, blah, 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 whatever. I forget what most of the hard drives are these days. That's what you want to select. Then you want to go stop interacting with the table, VO left arrow to the toolbar, interact with the toolbar, locate first aid, and VO space. When you do that, stop interacting, go over to the right to the scroll area. And it's going to be, you just kind of look at the prompts there. It's going to make sure, it's going to prompt you to be sure that you want to do first aid on the disk. You just, do the next button, let it do its thing. There's going to be a table of results. If there are any issues, you're going to find those issues in the table. But more times than not, it's just standard stuff that happens. The process should only take a couple of minutes tops. You'll find that it's done, that there'll be a done button that will be undimmed. It's going to be dimmed while the first aid is occurring, but when the first aid is finished, the done button will be available. And that's when you know the process is complete. You can always check the table, take your time, VO down arrowing once you interact with the table of results. If anything, particularly catches your attention, there may be, God forbid, there may be something about a serious disk problem, but, 9 times out of 10, it's just standard stuff you're going to see. And at the bottom, there'll be a message that will say the process was completed successfully. And then all you need to then do is restart your Mac. Just do Command Q again, and restart the Mac and let it, and then just make sure things are working the way they should be working. I've had to do this a few times over my Mac life. not at all frequently. Sometimes I just do it out of sake of habit, that I'm a geek, and I just like to kind of just go in there once in a while and do a first aid just to make sure, everything's copacetic, but it's not necessary for the average user to have to do it all the time. You should only go in there to do a first aid if you really are finding that the system is just not running properly. Maybe you're getting errors when you try to open up various applications, or applications are just shutting down mysteriously. Maybe there's Finder busy signals that are happening a lot. Just crazy stuff like that you just know from your experience shouldn't be occurring, and a reboot or a restart does not work. That's when you're going to want to do first aid. Now, if you need to do like repairs on external drives or thumb drives, or let's say you have an external drive that you boot off of, maybe you have a backup of your Mac, or maybe you have an earlier version of macOS. Some people still do this, where they have a system disk on an external drive. In that case, you can do disk utility and first aid from your Mac that's running, your actual Macintosh HD, because the external drive is not technically mounted. So you can actually do a first aid that way. But if you're actually trying to fix the problem on your Mac itself, you need to do that from the recovery partition. So I hope I have made that clear. So that is like some Mac OS stuff to be aware of. The only time you should really reinstall your Mac OS is if there is significant enough problems that a first aid is not helping. And it may just get to the point where your only course of action is to just go into recovery. Instead of selecting the disk utility, you're going to select the reinstall Mac OS. Now, you can do this without affecting your data. Your data is not going to be erased if you have to reinstall Mac OS. Theoretically, all it should do is re-download an installer, and just, all of the system data will be written over, but your user data should be fine. As I said earlier, though, time machine backup, do some kind of a backup. God forbid something weird does happen. I actually recently saw something happen with somebody where a power failure, nothing that they're doing. It was just one of those weird circumstances where they were doing an update in Mac OS, and they had a power failure. The whole neighborhood lost power. So when she was got her power back and was trying to turn the Mac on, nothing was happening. So I had to walk her through going into recovery and actually reinstalling Mac OS, because we just couldn't get anything else to work. Fortunately, reinstalling the OS and then updating from there, she's fine now, but it was kind of scary because, it was just one of those things you couldn't predict was going to happen at that time. Now, if worse comes to worse, the worst possible scenario is that you will have to erase your hard drive, your Macintosh HD, with disk utility, and then install Mac OS from scratch. That is the worst case scenario. If it gets to that point, that's something that an Apple, a support person should tell you to do. It's not something, unless you're comfortable with, working under the hood, so to speak. Some of us are. For me, I would probably, I've done it a few times where just things were just really, no matter what I did, I was still having weirdness happen. So the ultimate solution for me was wiping my Macintosh HD and putting Mac OS on there afresh, and then using Time Machine to restore my user data back onto the system. But, again, that's really a last alternative for anybody. You don't want to have to erase your disk and have to go through that process. In fact, realistically, if you get to that point, you should not restore from a backup. You should actually physically put your stuff back on. which is another reason why I always tell my clients or advise my clients, beside using Time Machine, you should have an external drive that in which you manually put, like, let's say, stuff from your home folder, your documents folder, anything that's important, your music, your videos, anything that is critical to you. You know, Time Machine's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't trust Time Machine, but it's always a good idea to have an extra backup, manual backup of your most important stuff, because that might serve you well at some point. As I said, with me, I've had to go, I think I've experienced just about everything as a Mac user over the last 17 years. Now, if you do install Mac OS from scratch, you are going to have to go through all the setup screens as a new user would if you just bought your Mac, you know, out of the store and you got it out of the box and set up. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to be facing, you know, all those typical setup screens, and you can make your choices accordingly as you go along and then get the Mac up and running. All right, so before I jump into applications, a note on beta testing. I've gotten a lot of questions from different people and some of my clients over the years. Some people are interested in, you know, beta testing and you know, really into it and want to kind of be part of the process. I do recommend beta testing, but let me just put a few cautionary notes about this. Number one, you can't be faint of heart. If you're going to beta test, you have to understand that you are testing software that has problems. Your job is reporting bugs and issues to Apple. So in other words, don't expect it to be smooth sailing. If you get frustrated easily, if you are not technically comfortable, you're probably not going to want to beta test. But if you are somebody who's technically comfortable with this stuff and you're willing to take a shot and be adventurous, the other piece of advice I can offer you is do not beta test on a working machine. In other words, if it's your everyday system, do not beta test. Use an external drive or create, because of you know, the Apple APFS, Apple file system, you can create volumes now, containers and such, that you can you know, you can actually beta test on your actual system, but you just boot to the beta test version. So in other words, if you wanted to beta test Ventura when it becomes available as a public beta, you would actually create a APFS volume on your Mac, and then you could install the Ventura system onto that APFS volume. And it does not affect your actual Mac that you use every day. You just have to go into System Preferences under Startup Disk and choose the APFS volume with Ventura and restart there. And then when you're done playing with Ventura, you go back to System Preferences under Startup Disks and you choose your regular Macintosh HD running Monterey, or if you haven't. Is that changed, sir?
Unfortunately, it has. Unless they change it before the public beta comes out, getting back to your main system is not as easy as it is getting into your new one.
Oh, see, I haven't done this yet, so I'm assuming from years of experience. Why would they change that?
I have no idea. I mean, they've changed System Preferences. It's no longer System Preferences. It's called System Settings, and it's in a table instead of a long grid. So, but yeah. Exactly. There's some stuff moved around. So if you're a diehard don't like change, I would suggest waiting for the public release so everything's intact mostly, and you can get some patience ready, because it's going to take some.
Yeah, and again, this is a great illustration of what I said earlier about beta testing. You can't be of the faint of heart. Like, to me, I'm now excited because now it's a challenge to me. Because now I want to see what they changed. I want to figure out, you know, what I would have to do and all that stuff. But not everybody is cut out for that kind of adventure, you know. So it's just one of these things. I really, the reason why I recommend people beta test, because the more voices we get out there, the more people who report bugs, the more people who report, who ask for enhancements, the better it is, because sometimes bugs are treated as priorities if enough people complain about them. There is this, and even after beta testing, or even if you're not a beta tester, you can still report bugs to Apple. You can still use accessibility@apple.com as as the email address, and you can report problems, but just do so in a very detailed manner. Try to explain the steps. Don't just say, oh yeah, there's a problem in mail, I can't see my messages. That tells the engineer absolutely nothing. You have to explain what's happening, what was normally the expected behavior, and what is going on now that makes you report it as a bug. The more details you can give an engineer, the easier it's going to make it for them to replicate those bugs and hopefully fix them. So that's why, there's an assumption sometimes, and I've heard a lot of people say this, oh, I don't have to report it, somebody else has already done it. No, do not have that mentality. I know Matt and Cliff are in the same boat as me. For those of you guys who've worked with Matt and Cliff, our philosophy is do not assume. If you find a bug, report it. Let Apple know. Don't say, oh, the other guy will do that, because that's not how you're going to get something fixed. As I said, you get enough voices out there reporting the same thing. That's how you get bugs moved up the priority chain. If they don't know about it, they're not going to fix it. And don't assume everybody else out there has got the same, mindset that they all reported it, and so you don't have to. It doesn't work that way. Trust me. I have spoken to Apple engineers, and sometimes things I'm very surprised are not brought to their attention because obviously people are not reporting it. So that's just my piece of advice for, whether you decide that you want to be a beta tester or not. All right, so let's move from macOS stuff to applications. Now, applications on your Mac are not perfect, just like macOS, but by and large, you should probably not run into issues all that often with apps, other than some minor inconveniences here and there. Applications, particularly the core ones that come with the Mac, work well, but then, when you're dealing with third parties, that can be a little bit different. So, there's some basic things that you can do as far as like figuring out whether an app is a problem or not. So, if you're dealing, for example, with a word processor, so let's just say, for example, you're trying to use Microsoft Word, or you're trying to use Pages, and a document keeps crashing on you, the app keeps crashing on you, any kind of edits that you're making are not being saved. Couple of things you should kind of do. Number one, see if it happens with other documents. So in other words, if it's a consistent thing that happens with every document you try to open or edit in that application, then the application is the problem. If it's just that document that's causing the application to crash, then you might have a corrupted document. If it is that kind of situation, you might want to try to open the document in a different word processor app. So if it's a Microsoft Word document, you're working with Microsoft Word, try to open the document in Pages and see if the same thing happens. Or go and download something free like iText Express, see if that will open the document and cause the app to crash.
And I want to point out too, John, that it just goes back to what you were saying when it was talking about disk utility and first aid and reinstalling the OS. When you're installing third-party apps, you have to be ready to be disappointed. You have to have patience because it's not an Apple app. It's not made by an Apple developer. So, of course, it's going to be a different way of navigating or working with it or installing it or whatever the case may be. Prime example, you just brought it up, so I'll point it out. Microsoft Word, it doesn't work the same way Pages does. Unfortunately, unless something has changed in the last week with Word, you have to have Quick Nav on and change your rotor with the left and up arrow or the right and up arrow to lines or sentences to navigate. Otherwise, if you have quick nav off or have any other rotor selection selected, then it's going to read you the whole document all at once, and you're not going to be able to go word by word, character by character, unless you have it on quick nav on with sentences or lines selected. I mean, that's in my experience. And I've been working with it, unfortunately, for the last 2 months. I was in a training that required it, so I had to delve into it, and I had to practice my patience because I'm not a Microsoft Word person, but I'd rather put Word on my Mac than my hands on a PC. So that's just, something to look out for.
Right, and Word has other, oddities. It's got its own spell checker. It does not conform to using the, let's say the Apple Universal Spell Checker with Command Shift semicolon, or the, highlight next spell misspelled word command with Command semicolon. So keep that in mind too. So, and this will happen with third-party apps. Sometimes there are just issues that you need to kind of be very patient and try different approaches. Sometimes you may have to reinstall an app just to see if that's not the problem. I'll tell you a quick story. I use Abby Fine Reader Pro, and all of a sudden it just wasn't working. It would start, but there would be no windows. It would say Abby Fine Reader Pro has no windows. And then when I actually get it to start, when I would try to use it for any task, whether I was trying to scan something or convert PDF into text, it would crash on me. So I did all my troubleshooting. I tried different things, and it was just a problem with the app. Ultimately, what I ended up having to do was go to their website and download the app again. Unfortunately, it did require me having to put my licensing information in again, because I bought it through their web store, not through because I think it's available now through the App Store. But back years ago, it wasn't available through the App Store. You could only get it through their website. So I had to re-download it, reinstall the app, and have to put all my licensing stuff in. But once I did that, everything worked fine. So somehow a resource got corrupted, and the only way that resource could get fixed was by reinstalling the app. This also happened with Mars Edit with me. I was having issues with Mars Edit reaching my blogs, updating my blogs, syncing them. I actually had to contact Daniel at Red Sweater, the developer for Mars Edit, and he helped me. We troubleshot. I took some advice from him. Everything that he told me was not working. So ultimately, he told me the best thing you could do is just reinstall it, which I did, and everything's working fine now with Mars Edit. So, sometimes you may have to reach out to developers, but, if you really get frustrated.
That's a great app too. I use it too.
Yeah. But if you get frustrated, also make sure there isn't an update available for the app. That sometimes is an issue. People kind of ignore when you get those little prompts when you open apps that say, hey, a new version of the blah, blah, blah app is available. And then you have the, update now, install on, quit, or remind me later. 9 times out of 10, people are busy. So what do? Remind me later, remind me later, remind me later. And ultimately, it stops bugging you. So you fall so far behind, you may have a version of the app that is not compatible with the latest version of macOS. So, always check to make sure there is not an available update for that app, because that could be the simplest solution to why things are crashing on you or why things are not working. And then with some lazy developers that don't have an update mechanism within their app itself, you may actually have to go to their website and download the latest version directly from their web store or whatever it is, or you may have to actually go the extra mile and contact the developer and find out if there's any known issues with the latest version of Mac. I know when Big Sur came out, there were some developers that were scrambling, and there were some apps that people relied on that did not work well with Big Sur initially because of all the under the hood security changes that Apple had made at the time. So it's not a bad idea to go to the website, find the contact area option, and shoot the developer an email and just ask them if there's any known issues, explain what it is you're experiencing. Maybe they can tell you right off the bat, oh, you need to do A, B, and C, so that's a quick, way to fix an application problem. If you're a bit more adventurous and tech savvy, there are some further steps you can do. And, I'm going to just mention them here. I'm not saying that anybody has to go this route. It's only just for the sake of curiosity for those of you guys who would want to try something like this. But one of the things you also can do is you can go into your user library, find the preferences folder, and you'll see app preferences that are, available. Your preferences folder for apps is going to be in your user library. Now, remember that it's not always visible for the average user. So the easiest way to get to your user library quickly is to go to the menu bar with VOM, go to the Go menu, and VO down arrow to library and VO space on that. So once you're in there and you find preferences, you're going to go into the preference folder.
Gamersoft folder app at.obdev.launchbar.plist other au.com.myriad.com.asobjc-runner.plist other one.
So preferences for apps are in what are called P lists or property lists. So these are special files that are, specific to that application. Now, typically, these P lists contain all of your registration stuff, any kind of user preferences that you change. So I want to point that out right up front. You want to be very careful with P list files. But one of the things you can do if you really have a troublesome app that you just can't figure out what's going on is you can rename the P list file for that application. So typically the application, the naming convention for P list usually has the developer included.
at.obdev.launchbar.plist other ones.
So you'll always find a developer and the name of the application in the name. So this is for LaunchBar, this particular P list file, which is an application which I just haven't messed with in quite a long time. I know some people use it religiously, but I just haven't really messed with it in a while. But you want to make sure you find out and you may have to do a little bit of an internet search to find out what the actual property list is called for your app in question. But once you find it, you remember that if you hit the edit key, the return key on your keyboard, you go into edit mode. So you just want to slightly change the name of the P list file for that application, maybe put a couple of brackets at the start of it, and then you're going to restart the application. Now, when you restart the application, it's going to create a new P list file. Now, the problem obviously with this is that it may ask you to put licensing information and crap in there again, but that's not the problem as far as you just want to make sure the application is going to work. If the application works, then you know that is a corrupted P list, and you may have no choice but then have to put in all your user data and stuff like that, whatever your license, your key, your whatever information that you needed to register that app. But if the app is, it doesn't seem that it's the P list that's causing the problem, you can always go back to the original P list and remove the brackets, obviously first delete the P list that was created when you opened the app, but go back to the old P list file, get rid of the brackets, and this way it will go back to using that original P list. But again, this is more of an extreme kind of thing to do. And you only want to do something like this, as I said, if it's absolutely necessary, where all your other options, all the other things you try to do, you make sure you got the latest version of macOS, you make sure you have the latest version of the application. You want to make sure all that stuff is in line before you go to extremes like playing with P list files. You could even edit a plist file if you were super knowledgeable. A lot of them are written in either Xcode, or you can actually use text edit in certain cases. But again, I would not, and I emphasize not do stuff like that unless you absolutely know what you're doing. Because if you screw around with a plist file, you could corrupt the app completely yourself and have to, basically go and reinstall the app yourself and all that stuff. Now, another little trick you can do if you were really of a technical mind to do so is you can create a secondary account on your Mac, whether it's an administrator or a standard user account, and you can try to run the app from that secondary account and the document or file or whatever that's giving you a problem. Because if there's no issues when you run it from the secondary account, then you definitely know there is some resource that has to do with your specific account that is causing this app to crash. In other words, it's not the app itself, it's some kind of corrupted resource that is only specific to your account. And if that's the case, then you're just going to have to delete the app and reinstall it from scratch. Unfortunately, that may be your only recourse in that kind of situation. So there are a lot of really geeky Mac users out there that will actually tell you that you should have a standard account that you use for every day, and you only use your administrator credentials to do updates and things that require administrative permission to do. I don't particularly do that myself. I don't find it necessary, but then, I trust my judgment. I'm not going to, I'm not going to agree to install plugins and stuff just because the system prompts me to do so, unless there's a specific reason for me to put in my administrative password to allow something to happen on my Mac. I don't generally get fooled by, stuff like that. But there are some Mac users that's, basically feel that most users are a danger to themselves. So they should have a standard account they play with every day, and they only use their administrative account for situations that require it. I think that's more of an insult to a lot of people's intelligence, but that's a debate for another day. All right, so peripherals. Peripherals are their own special brand, their own special species. That could be things like external hard drives are most commonly, but you could have microphones and speakers and stuff like that that count as peripherals, scanners. But that as far as troubleshooting that, a lot of times you got to just make sure you have the proper drivers. Everything's got to be updated, specifically, and that includes printers too. They can kind of separate printers and peripherals, but in a way they're kind of the same thing as far as they're things that connect to your Mac for use. But as far as like your external hard drives, always check system disk utility, and you can do this with the Mac running, obviously, because this is an external drive, but always check disk utility, make sure that the drive and any volumes that you have created, because sometimes people will partition the external drive. Let's say you have a 3 terabyte drive, they might make a 1.5 and a 1.5 terabyte volumes. So they have 2 separate volumes on that external drive. You want to make sure that the volumes show up in disk utility, and you might want to do a first aid on them to make sure there's no issues. But if the drive does not appear at all in disk utility, then it could be a hardware issue. And you can also check system preferences and look under the system information. You also can do that by way of the Apple menu, and when you're on About This Mac. So let me just do that here, just so you hear what I'm talking about.
Menu bar, Apple, About This Mac.
If you hold down the Option key,
System information,
it turns to System Information. You can VO space to open System Information, and you can check to see if the external drive shows up under your, your USB or whatever the drive happens to be, Thunderbolt, whatever it is, you look under that category to see if that drive is actually appearing in system information. If you don't see it in system information, you don't see it in disk utility, like I said, it could very well be a hardware problem. But a lot of times when you have trouble with external drives, it's usually that there is some kind of corruption in the file system and it just requires a first aid. But again, you want to be very specific and make sure, obviously, try to plug the drive into other ports. If you're using a hub, you take the drive out of the hub, directly plug it into the Mac to see if it comes up that way. You want to make sure, in other words, you want to, exhaust all the obvious things. Make sure that it's not the hub that's the problem. Make sure you don't have a defective port on your Mac. Some of the older drives that require AC power, obviously make sure that that's plugged in. If you have a powered hub, make sure that the plug didn't fall out. I just had it with a client a few months ago who drove me crazy for a half hour in a lesson trying to troubleshoot a problem she was claiming she was having with her drive. And what it came down to is her husband came in and he saw that the plug for the hub had fallen out. So it was not getting power. So therefore she was not getting power to the drive. So things like that, you have to take into consideration. Sometimes the obvious solution is the answer. My problem a lot of times when I tech support, and I've told this to Cliff and other friends of mine, is I always go beyond the basic. I'm always like jumping to the more sophisticated answer to a tech support problem. So I end up shooting myself in the foot half the time. So when I'm saying about look at the obvious, I'm also including myself in that piece of advice because I don't always follow it. I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me in most embarrassing situations as well, when the discovery was that it was something as simple as a plug or the volume being turned down completely on a device where I thought that there was a hardware issue and it just turned out the person had turned the volume all the way down. So the obvious things you always want to start with first, and that also includes printers. Make sure that the printer is actually on. My sister-in-law is famous for doing that, forgetting to turn the printer on and not understanding why the printer's not working. So if it's a connected printer, make sure that the printer cables, everything is where it's supposed to be. If it's a Wi-Fi printer, make sure that it actually shows up as a Wi-Fi device. You can go into system preferences under print and scan and make sure if it's a printer that you've used, it's going to show up in the printer list table. And then you'll see the status. If you interact with the table, you can find the status of that printer. So if it says offline or unavailable, then you might have an issue where the printer is either not on or you might have a problem with your network. So, you want to be very careful when you troubleshoot issues and don't assume, that the printer is broken. It could be something as simple as that, where maybe it's just not turned on. Maybe you have to reboot the printer. Like I have an issue with my HP 4650 where it just goes offline mysteriously once in a while. And the simple solution is to reboot the printer and give it like 2 minutes and it comes back up on the network and everything is good to go. But printers do have their own set of things that you can do. Drivers can be an issue with printers. You want to make sure that you do have the latest drivers. Now, 9 times out of 10 with a Mac, the drivers will get updated automatically, particularly if you do a system update. Usually drivers are included in that system update, but you may have to at times go through the look in the options under your printer and system preferences under print and scan, and you may have to see if you need to download device drivers and stuff in there. In some cases, it's not, printer models is always going to affect how you do these things. So whether it's an HP, an Epson, a Canon, et cetera, you want to you may have to do a little poking around on the internet to find out how you initiate a check to make sure you have the latest drivers. I know with HP, it typically just happens, you know, with the Mac updates, or on occasion when I go to use the printer, it might actually tell me that there's a driver updated being downloaded, and it gives me, you know, maybe 10 seconds, and then the printer starts working again. So things like that, you want to make sure you understand, you know, your model of printer and how that stuff actually will, you know, will work for you. And obviously ink, you know, you want to check printer resources. Again, it is accessible in most cases. If you go into system preferences under print and scan, there's usually a tab for supplies when you look at your printer, and it should give you a percentage of the ink. So if you explore, if you have a printer that uses different ink cartridges, 4 ink cartridges, 6, whatever the case may be, it will actually show you the percentages for each of those ink cartridges. And also when you print, there is what's called the printer proxy that comes up. Now, when print jobs complete successfully, it goes away. So you might hear VoiceOver say printer proxy launched in background. But then if you command tab around after the print job is completed, you don't see anything. That's a good thing. If you find the printer proxy application still open when you command tab, then you have a problem. And what you need to do is take a look around with the VO arrow keys. There is a table of jobs that you'll find. And if there is a problem like a printer jam, the printer's out of paper, there's low ink, you will see the error messages. So you can kind of troubleshoot from that printer proxy. And that's a good way to kind of discover if there's something more serious going on, or just something as simple as, like I always run into, is either the low ink or printer is out of paper. That's a famous one that always happens to me. I always forget about the paper, and just, you know, when I go to print one day, there's no paper in there. So the printer proxy is a very telling thing to look at as far as printers go. You know, you just want to command tab around, because that will always be present and does not go away until you dismiss it, you know, by quitting it, if there is any issues with a print job. All right, so that brings us to Q&A.
Oh, sorry. Since I downloaded the Monterey, this could be a small problem. The Safari goes off 5 or 10 seconds at a time. Say, Safari is not responding, Safari is not responding. It doesn't last very long. And that is in certain website worse than others. Not happen all the time, but one website, for example, Yahoo Finance, it happened much more often. And you need any suggestion what could be the problem?
Do you have any like custom voiceover settings that are important to you? Like, have you changed voiceover settings, you know, in the voiceover utility?
Currently unmuted.
No, I have not.
Zoom.us has new window.
If you haven't, if it's okay, like you're not worried about your voiceover preferences, what I've done on occasion is I've gone into voiceover utility under the file menu in voiceover utility. So your VOM, you go to file, go down the file menu, and there's an option to reset your voiceover utility preferences. Do that and see if that makes a difference, because I've actually had issues with Safari busy signals and just kind of crazy stuff that was happening. I just reset my voiceover preferences and everything works fine.
Yeah.
So I am, but I want to give you a cautionary, like for anybody who wants to try this, if you have specific voiceover utility changes that you've made, make sure you document them, because if you reset the preferences, you're going to have to make those changes as well. But, you know, sometimes when you're troubleshooting, you have to do what you have to do. So, you know, just a suggestion. You go into voiceover utility, and then you go to VOM to the file menu, you know, VOM, go to file, go down the file menu, and it's about 4 or 5 items down, it's going to say reset voiceover preferences to factory defaults. That's the one you want to choose. It's going to ask you to confirm that you want to definitely do it. You just confirm it, and that will reset your voiceover preferences. And then, what you want to do then is obviously, fire up Safari and see if you have the same problems. Trying to I was very worried about this particular lesson because I wanted to be sure I subdivided the macOS stuff from application troubleshooting, but I wanted to be thorough in both cases without being overly technical. Because I kind of dummied down. Cliff will know because he takes my Apple Certified Support Professional class. We go into a lot more depth with macOS and application troubleshooting. So I just wanted to kind of give a skeletal sort of approach to this that's not going to be overly technical. But if anybody is that interested in this stuff, contact me privately if you have any specific questions. Thanks for attending this class, and I will catch you guys all later.
Remember, for all Mac, iOS, and any kind of Apple training, visit macfortheblind.com. John Panarese has some free courses and some reasonable paid courses. You won't be disappointed. See you next time.